Hey gamers, I'm the Bad Luck Gamer, and welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking about the two new classes released on the Pathfinder 2E playtest that are going to be coming out for the new book, Dark Archive. I'm actually super hyped out for this book. This book is going to be really interesting. I thought that their next book was going to be the Marshall book to balance out the Secrets of Magic book they just came out with the other day. Maybe that's Guns and Gears. I don't know. I figured that's the way they were going to go, but no. Instead, they're coming out with an occult book. And this occult book is going to be a lot more about the supernatural magics of the world, about rituals and talismans and things that don't necessarily make sense from an arcane perspective. I'm actually really excited about this book. I am way up the alley of occult things. I love the supernatural. I love Cthulhu-esque things. I like anything that just like is supernatural and has no rational explanation. This is going to deliver on two new classes, which is going to be the Thaumaturge and the Psychic. Now, I was a little off base when I had my predictions before. I was basing it on more of a Marshall book. I am still kind of right with the Psychic and the Kineticist, but the Psychic is very, very different than the Kineticist. And apparently, Psychic was also in first edition, like as its own class. I wasn't really aware of it, but they did about the same thing, so it really didn't matter all too much. But let's start with the Psychic, because the Psychic I feel is really good, and I think it's the better written of the two, conceptually speaking. But you'll have to remember that when I speak about both of these classes, this is not even like a real playtest of what they're going to be releasing. This is a rough draft of for their ideas for these two classes. And so if you go to the site and you read them over, just know they're going to be a little rough. All classes that have been on the playtest were really rough and then got made way better once it released for the game. Magus is a good example. Their spell strike was a mess before they rewrote it for Secrets of Magic. So just know these classes will get better when they come out in Dark Archive. But for now, we're just going to take a look at what they have going, so we can get an idea of what their mentality is for these classes. Psychic is not what anyone expected. Psychic is a occult spellcaster. They're an occult spontaneous spellcaster, which makes them pretty much the same as Bard, but obviously different. The Psychic has 2 spell slots max for everything but 10th level, which they have a feat that can give them 2 10th level slots. An additional 10th level slot, I should say. But what their biggest focus for this class is, to make up for the lack of spell slots, is their higher focus on their psychic cantrips. Now, their psychic cantrips utilize cantrips from the occult spell lists, but each of their subconsciouses or subconscious minds that you can pick come with 2 of those cantrips that can be altered and amped. And amping is actually what this class will spend its focus points on. So you'll amp an ability using a focus point, making it better. Telekinetic Throw, for instance, will do more damage when you amp it. And as you level up in this class, the amps will change, either get stronger, or just you can use different kinds of amps altogether. On top of that, they have feats to augment these amps as well for some of these abilities. I think this is a really cool idea. It's a class that's focused on its cantrips, and I think that just gives it a lot more of a viability for just a free reign spellcaster, with the ability of occult spells being the bigger, finite use abilities that they have. I understand why they went with occult, because occult has a lot of mental and emotional based spells, but there's some that just really don't work with the psychics that I'm really kind of confused on what they're like, what the thematics are. Like, Animate Dead is on the occult spell list, and that's not really a psychic ability. And that there's so many of that are like this that are just kind of on a different level. Now, psychic powers are still considered spells, so you can still have them counterspelled, and you can also have them be canceled out by null magic or whatever, anti-magic zones. So that's kind of weird. I mean, I understand that, like, functionally for the system, that's the way they had to go with it. Still a little functionally weird in my mind, anyway. But they have a higher focus spell limit. And one of the things that I really like about the Psychic is they start with 2 focus points, similar to the Oracle, but they get a refocus ability early on that lets them refocus 2 of their psychic points as long or focus points as long as they were only used for their side powers. That's pretty cool. That's pretty epic. I really like that. It gives this class a very dynamic way of utilizing their powers and not forcing them to sit down for 20, 30 minutes to get their things all back in order after every combat. Another thing that is really cool is that pretty much every one of these subconscious minds they have for psychic replace verbal components with a concentrate component. That's really cool. You can do a lot more subtle spell casting with this, and it's a lot easier to hide, somatic components with like a deception or with a stealth or even with a, like a thievery kind of role. So that allows the psychics to do a lot of magic without being very obvious about it, even being in close proximity to their intended target. That is really, really cool. Another thing about it that's really interesting as well is a lot of these subconscious minds come with a focus attribute wise for their intelligence or charisma, emotional or like some kind of willpower thing. Granted, that's a really weird thing. It changes what their key attribute is for their class to either intelligence or charisma, but why not wisdom? I guess because they have a lot of wisdom casters, maybe, but like wisdom applies directly to a character's willpower. So why would they pick the 2 mental traits not associated with the willpower save to do this? It's really, really weird. It's probably some game balancing thing. Thematically, it just is very strange to me. Like I said, both of these classes are really kind of funky, and there's some kind of cognitive discourse between what they want for it and the game's balance. But I don't know. It's going to be, I think when they actually come out with the Psychic, it's going to be a really well done class. I like what they're going for. They have a very strong emphasis on the use of cantrips. So they're going to be a caster that has stronger cantrips than most at the cost of spell slots. And I think that's a good idea. I think that's a really good way to move. I think what they should do is have like minor amps for their 2 like cantrips, their side cantrips that are automatic that don't require focus points, and then focus points to amp them even further so that they have cantrips that are better than standard casters that they can use freely, but then they can amp them even further. They also get other focus spells, psychic specific ones per subconscious mind, or at least for most of them anyway, that does some really interesting things. But I think they really have something good going on for that. But talking about something no one expected, the Thaumaturge is not a spellcaster. Which, if you played the prior edition, that seems really weird because the Thaumaturge in the prior edition was a prestige class between wizard and, well, technically arcane and divine casters, mostly wizard and cleric, that allowed them to combine both to make new kinds of spells, composite spells. The Thaumaturge is actually more based on the occultist, which they had in first edition, but is just different. First of all, not a spellcaster. Okay, that's weird. Another weird thing, their key attribute is charisma. So, yeah, you're probably asking the same kind of questions like, what the hell? A martial class, key attribute being charisma. And that's because they have this feature where they can detect the weakness in enemies using a recall knowledge check, but it uses their charisma instead of their intelligence. I think that's really cool. Being able to use your charisma for recall knowledge checks on supernatural creatures is really interesting. There's some stuff about it that I'll talk about in a second here, but once you do this, you'll either learn about their highest weakness or all their weaknesses, plus whatever else you would normally get on the recall knowledge. And then you can apply what's called esoteric antithesis and you either you enchant your weapon with with an attribute that applies the strongest weakness to the enemy, which is really weird because it actually doesn't change the damage of your weapon. Your weapon just applies the same weakness effect. So if the enemy is weak to fire, for instance, you don't do fire damage. Your damage is just considered fire for the sake of their weakness. But one of the really cool things about this is it can manifest a weakness in an enemy that normally doesn't have one at a level of 2 plus half your level. That is really, really cool. I was really concerned when they had this mention of weaknesses because not all enemies have weaknesses. But this allows you to generate a weakness in an enemy, making it so you just automatically do more damage that will never be resisted by the enemy as long as you do 1 damage to the target. Or as long as you successfully hit the target with an item that does the damage. Because technically, because of how their ability works, their damage could be resisted but could still apply the weakness. It's really weird. Thaumaturge is really weird because in addition to this whole esoteric knowledge thing, they get implements. And implements are like a small item, like an amulet or a chalice or even like a special kind of weapon that does other things that give them this utility vibe. They have this amulet that allows them to reduce damage, similar to the paladins, like, or the champions, like all their step abilities. Interesting. Or like this chalice that allows you to give hit points back to a target or temporary hit points to yourself or a target. Also interesting. And they can get up to 3 of these implements as they level up. So they have like a bag of tricks. They have like this pouch or satchel that they just pull something out of. It has some functionality weakness to an enemy. Like thematically what it is they're attacking the metaphysical connections between a particular creature and the world around it. And so you can damage the components of like reality around a creature. Like you can damage a tyrant lord by utilizing a collar from a freed slave. You know, whatever works. I think it's cool. I think it's really interesting. But charisma as their main attribute, and again, another charisma based character, which there are a few already, and I don't know why they've done this with this. And remember, they're still a martial class. They still have to hit enemies and dodge attacks. So charisma is such a weird one to put in, and I think that's just going to cause a lot of problems. And not only that, but like the whole idea behind the thaumaturge is they have a esoteric knowledge of like all these kinds of things, all these strange facts, and like this intimate knowledge of these weird connections in the world. And they're not an intelligence-based character, so they know all of this, but they don't need intelligence to know all of this. And I think that's just a dyssynergy in their stats. Like, they're a smart character who's researched all this information, but they can be as dumb as a brick. I don't know. You got me. That's a really weird way of going about it. Now, they have a very specific, like, training, but they're also just trained in all the knowledge-based skills. Even not considering the recall knowledges normally, like, you would still need intelligence or wisdom. Like, okay, I don't know. Like I said, these classes are really rough at the get-go. Thaumaturge is also really weird, and I think one of the things that Thaumaturge is really missing is they're a martial class with not many martial abilities. All their abilities are focused on using like talismans, scrolls, utilizing objects, increasing their esoteric knowledges, all this kind of stuff. They do still have some that are like 2 actions, attack, and do something else. But I feel like they just need a lot more synergy between martial abilities and these esoteric abilities that they're trying to add to the class. And I think there's this identity crisis that class is having where it's like, well, Do I hit things because I'm really a monster hunter and like my abilities increase my damage? By a lot. By a lot. Like, statistically speaking, at level 1, you can drop, what is it, 2 plus half your level, so it's 3 plus 2 more because of or use implement. Yeah, you can do 5 extra damage level 1. That's nuts. But then they have no combat abilities to back it up. You're just hitting the enemy. And I feel like what they should do is, if they want this to be like their main feature, have that set up action, and then as they attack, each of their attacks are like a like an assist action from fighter or something, where like they're helping their allies out. If you want them to have this utility based functionality, which is what I feel like they really are after. They're just making a class that's really focused on utilizing magic objects, and they kind of are focused around utility more than combat. So give them those functions as a part of strike actions. There's no reason not to. It doesn't break the game with any of the other classes that do it. So I feel like either a character is just going to focus on getting as much of an attack bonus as possible so that they can do this extra damage as much as they can, or they're just going to be really confused on whether they should do a support action or an attack action, because they just get filled with all these possible support actions. Also, utilizing scrolls takes actions. I feel like the action economy for the Thaumaturge is going to be really messy, and it's going to be really interesting for people who like having a lot of options, but there's just not going to be any synergistic flow to it. Both of these classes have a bunch of feats that do a lot of interesting classes as well. So I recommend that anyone who does sound interested in either of these classes to go to Paizo's, playtest website, check them out. They're really cool. They're really interesting. I love the ideas behind them. They just need to be ironed out a bit, and they need to be a little bit more functionally synergistic with how Pathfinder runs. Magus was perfect. If they can make more classes like Magus that has a very good flow to how they interact in combat, that's really, really good. Summoner was a little messy still, I think, when it came back, but I think they did as good as they could for the idea they were going for. I just really hope that Psychic and Thaumaturge really gets the same treatment that Magus did and gets that same flow, because what makes a session run really well is when a player is informed on what decisions they need to make based on their class features. That way you have less time of a player agonizing over their actions and just doing things, which makes the game run better and smoother and keeps the immersion. But those are my ideas. If you guys want, I will talk about these classes more in depth in another video. So please leave a comment down below letting me know if that's what you want. Otherwise, next week, I'm probably going to keep on with my why this class is awesome, starting with Cleric. Or not starting with, but next is going to be Cleric on my list of classes. So if you want new class stuff, let me know. If you're happy with how things are, let me know. Or just don't say anything. Also, I hate to do this, but please subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I don't like asking for something like that, but it helps motivate me to make more of these videos. And not only that, but it helps me on YouTube as well. And it's just proven that asking improves one's subscriber count. So that's just, this is the job I'm trying to do. And I'm only asking you to do it if you like this content and you want to see more. If this is just a fling for you, don't mind, don't bother, I hope I show up on your timeline again. All right, and with that, we're going to go ahead and end this video. Thank you all so much for watching. I highly appreciate it. If you want to check out my Discord, check out the description down below. I'm currently recruiting for my new game coming up on October 13th. It's going to be every Wednesday or Friday, 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We're doing a campaign, Pathfinder 2nd Edition, in the Mwangi Expanse. Really excited about that, so go ahead, check out the Discord down below. Join up with other cool people who love tabletop as much as I do. And good luck on your games. Leave the bad luck to me, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.